So the history of the United States raising the debt ceiling brings a set of complex challenges, political negotiations, and even evolving fiscal policy, right? It's been a recurring issue since its inception. Now, talk of the United States defaulting on its debt takes over the news cycle every few years. So what does it mean? Who owns our debt? Are we actually going to default? Those have been the reigning questions, especially lately, but especially over the last year or so. Now, every few years, this gives an opportunity for politicians on both sides of the aisle to flex their muscles, pound their chest, and demand certain spending increases or decreases in specific areas that forwards their political agenda. But in quite honesty, it does not really help the American people as a whole. For them, it's about re-election and again, pounding their chest, saying that they got things done and again, to further their political careers, right? As humans, we want to grow and flourish and have job security, and they're fighting for the same thing. They say they're fighting for their constituents, which you would hope so, and in some instances they do, but it's also political theater and trying to increase their power position as well. So let's get into it. So who owns our debt anyway? I often hear people concerned with China owns the United States. Well, let's take a deep dive into that. And again, if you don't get our newsletters, there's some charts that I'm going to reference here. But if you're looking at the newsletter now, it's going to be below the video. So let's look at the U.S. dependency on foreign lenders to finance the federal debt and how it's risen over the past few decades. So 1970, foreign holdings in our U.S. debt was 5%. Our public debt at that point was $283 billion. Now, if you look at this going forward to 1995, so fast forward 25 years, public debt was about $3.604 trillion. Foreign holdings of our debt jumped up to 23%. Now, end of 2022, again, December 2022, we're going to only look at the last year end. Our public debt was about $24.5 trillion. Again, that's at the end of 2022. Foreign holdings increased from 1995 to 2022 for a total of 30% of our total debt, of our total public debt, outstanding debt, 30% was foreign holdings. So you might be surprised to learn, though, that the largest holder of the public debt isn't China. It's not mutual funds. It's not any of that. It's our own Federal Reserve System. They are actually owners of 35% of our total public debt, of our domestic holdings. So 35% is our Federal Reserve, 15% is mutual funds, 10% is depository institutions, so like banks, 9% is state and local governments, 6% is pension funds, 2% is insurance companies, and then they have a 22% that's categorized as other. Now let's look into this a little bit further, right? So let's look at foreign holdings. So that was domestic holdings in percentages. This is foreign holdings of our debt. So foreign holdings have generally risen, right? You're looking back at those numbers that I gave you a minute ago or so. So I'm going to break down the top holders of our debt. Switzerland have increased their holdings in ours. Ireland, United Kingdom, Japan, China. Japan, you'd be surprised. So which one of those do you think is the largest holder of our debt? It's not China, it's actually Japan. So in 2011, China actually had the most amount of US debt on their books. Not anymore. They've actually decreased their holdings, and Japan is the largest holder of US debt. So what would happen if we defaulted? And now we know with the House and the Senate, they've actually passed the bill and sitting on President Biden's desk. It's going to be signed. Again, we're going to avoid default. So what would happen though if, let's say, hypothetically it didn't happen? There'd be a global financial crisis. So a US default would actually trigger a significant financial crisis. The value of the US Treasury bond market would plummet, causing substantial losses for investors worldwide. We know that. It creates instability in all financial markets, again, because the US is the reserve currency of the world. And if we can't pay our debts back, then really that's just a doom and gloom for the rest of the world. Higher borrowing costs would also come into effect. The cost of borrowing for the US government would skyrocket, obviously, right? Our credit rating would decrease, which is not a good look, and we'd lose our global dominance as the world reserve currency at that point. An economic recession would happen, which again, we're predicting a recession happening at this time already, but a more substantial economic recession would definitely happen, or even a depression if we were to default on government debt. Damage to our reputation, we talked about that, lowering the credit rating. It happened in 2011. It would happen again if we defaulted on the debt. And obviously looking at the global impact, right? Financial normalcy would collapse because everything's interconnected at this point. The global economy is interconnected, and a US default would have far-reaching effects worldwide. So again, not going to happen, very low chance of happening. We can't afford it to let it happen. And again, going back to our Instagram video, if you've seen that, follow us, BoyerFS, on Instagram, so Boyer_FS on Instagram. I posted a shorter video of this, talking about how it's all political theater and how we actually have enough revenue from payroll taxes and corporate taxes, individual taxes, to fund Social Security, Medicare, pay off our near-term debt that's coming due. And both sides of the aisle knew that. So again, a lot more political theater than people will realize. But again, we don't need to worry about that anymore. Most likely, Biden's going to sign the bill. It's going to pass. But what we really need is more fiscal responsibility in our government, because we are spending more than 100% of our GDP at this point. It's skyrocketing. We need, in the next few years, we're going to have this problem again in about 2 years or so, 2025, I believe it is. So we need to get the spending of the US government under control so we can be more fiscally responsible, excuse me. And I think all of us can agree on that. So thanks for watching. I know it's a long video, but check out our Instagram for the shorter version. You all have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.